Hi, folks. Welcome to the first panel in track 2 of Sacred Plants in the Americas. My name is Luís Fernando Tófoli. I'm from Brazil. I'm a psychiatrist at the University of Campinas, also a professor of psychiatry. And I'm sided with my two good friends and colleagues, Bruno Gomes and Camis Benedito. And we are going to talk about the Brazilian psychedelic science. We are happy to welcome you in this panel. The idea of presenting this panel, and basically the strange title it has to do, it's inspired by a song by the Brazilian psychedelic rock group from the 60s and the 70s named Os Mutantes, a song called Panis and Circensis. I will explain a little bit more about this in my presentation. And it has to do with the idea of how Brazil acknowledges, learns about things that come from the outside, and how these things are mingled within the Brazilian culture, and how they have new meanings and they are resignified within Brazilian culture. And that's how we expect to explain how this happens also with the Brazilian psychedelic science, right? So I have with me this, for us it's an afternoon, but might be this evening or this morning for you guys who are watching from all over the world. I have Camilo Benedito with me. He's going to present himself in more detail, but he has a master's and a PhD in sociology in the Brazilian Universidade Federal de São Carlos. And Bruno Ramos Gomes is a psychologist who has a master's degree in public health and is also is on his way to a doctorate on public health as well. And in this panel, we expect to discuss which research has been done in Brazil, the current scenario that we have in the Brazilian psychedelic science, the gray area that we have in Brazil regarding legal and illegal therapeutic practice with psychedelics, and how this impacts on the Brazilian therapeutic, so to speak, market. Also the political and social implications of psychedelic science, and how it has to do with the zeitgeist and the time that is happening, and the sad news that we have from Brazil regarding the COVID pandemic, and the federal government, who has, you probably have heard about it, a lot of problems in many terms, and they specifically have a very hostile position against native and indigenous peoples. So this is also important that we mention that we're talking about this, and a conference that's named Sacred Plant in the Americas. These sacred plants have been discovered and brought to us by indigenous peoples. And now at this moment in Brazil, we have an enemy of the indigenous peoples and an enemy of the Amazon. So we also have to keep that in mind when we have this discussion, okay? So I'm going to present. So it's first me, then Bruno, and then Camis, right? And I'll start my presentation about the subject. I've just introduced the theme, and we expect to have this discussion beyond the idea of only hard science. But even if we discuss hard science, we have to keep in mind that there's no possibility of looking at science without having a political and an ideological perspective. There's no science without ideology. Science by itself, it's a kind of ideology. So we expect to make a discussion here that is not centered basically on laboratories or the number of citations, though we also going to mention that, okay? So I'm going to share my screen. Just a second. Oh, sorry, I have to share my audio as well. Sorry, one more thing. I have to correct here my volume, so it's okay when you listen to our music. Did you hear it? Okay, here we go. So the title of our presentation is The Science Lit by the Heat of the Sun, the Brazilian Psychedelic Science. As I said, my name is Luís Fernando Tófoli. I am the head and a member of the Interdisciplinary Cooperation for Ayahuasca Research and Outreach, which is a research group that's based in the University of Campinas, Unicamp, in Brazil. And we are very pleased to be here, and we thank Shakruna for this invitation, and especially we thank Bia for her personal invitation. So why did we choose these words for our title? To understand that, I would like you to share 2 minutes of listening to music, to Brazilian music in English. Those who are native speakers of English might of words that are curious or actually wrong concerning the regular norm of the idiom. And this is why this was written by Brazilians. And also we have to change the title of our presentation. Originally it was A Science Lighted with the Light of the Sun, and then we were told that we should correct it to A Science Lit by the Light of the Sun, but the original lyrics go lighted with the light of the sun. Also a crowdy bus stop where it should be crowded. To reach out the sun where it should be to reach out to the sun, that same old people where it should be those same old people. And one funny thing about this is that that seemed to be not a native speaker who corrected these lyrics from this music. That was released in the Brazilian market, and it is a version in English of a song in Portuguese that was inside this album that it's called Tropicalia. And Tropicalia is a whole movement from the 60s in Brazil, and it was highly influenced by psychedelia, where elements that came from foreign countries, and especially in this case in Brazil, the electric guitar was something that was novel, and that were incorporated and mixed with local and traditional Brazilian music. So, this idea that you get something from the outside and you mix it with our native background, and by this native background, I'm not only talking about the indigenous background, but also the heritage that we have from enslaved Africans that came from Africa, and also the different types of Europeans and even Asians that came to Brazil. And all this has been mixed and brought forth as a political and a cultural movement called Tropicalia, which has ended while our dictatorship got harsher at the time. So we're talking about something that was free and that was not well seen by the right-wing dictatorship that we had during the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s. So the idea here is to discuss with you today how could we, inspired by Tropicalia or tropicalism, this movement from the 60s that also was inspired by psychedelics, how can we discuss the Brazilian psychedelic science that is happening right now? And what can we say about this science, right? You might have seen this paper. It's a paper that was published in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs. It's not a long time ago, in February of this year. And it is a quantitative calculation of the impact of papers regarding psychedelics, regarding classic psychedelics. We're talking here about LSD, psilocybin, DMT/ayahuasca, and mescaline, basically. And the way they worked on this paper was they separated old and new papers regarding these compounds, and they tried to select those papers that had basically bibliometric numbers, the highest impact in terms of citations and so. And they divided them in, as I said, the older papers and the contemporary, the new papers. And using the criteria that they used, they have 37 papers that were published until 2010 and 40 papers that were published after 2010, right? Let's examine this with a little more of detail. So regarding the older papers, we have 29 of these papers. That means 78% of them were published by American groups, by North American groups, United States. And 0 papers were published from Brazilian groups. When we have a look at the 40 newer papers, then we find that, again, the United States of America are in the first place with 15 papers, roughly 38% of the publications, and then Great Britain with roughly 33%. And then we have Brazil with 1/8 of these 40 papers with 12.5%. Then we have 4 papers from Switzerland, and from Germany, the Netherlands, and Norway, 1 paper each. If we have a closer look at these papers that were published in Brazil, then we're going to find something that is interesting and that has to do with sacred plants. 4 of these 5 papers were experimental or clinical trials, experimental papers are connected with ayahuasca. So we have 3 papers that dealt with the ayahuasca for depression by and colleagues in 2015. And then Rafael Sanchez and colleagues in 2016. And then the randomized control trial of Fernando Frontes from the group of Braulio Araújo from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, and which was the first clinical trial, randomized and placebo-controlled randomized clinical trial with a psychedelic for depression. a paper with fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, also from first author is phone. And the fifth is a systematic review by Rafael dos Santos in 2006 from the group of USP, University of São Paulo, in Ribeirão Preto. And also Flávio Osório, and the papers, and the second and third papers are also from this group in the University of São Paulo. And I'm included as in the authors of two of these papers. And also I think it's important that you know that in considering that we have these 5 papers, 3 of them, 2 by Fernando Fuentes and 1 by Flávio Osório, had as first authors. And the reason that ayahuasca is so important, it's more probably all of you know that, is the fact that ayahuasca is legal in Brazil, or it at least is legitimized, and it's at least it's not illegal for ritual and religious purposes, also for scientific reasons. So it's much easier in Brazil to start a trial with ayahuasca to a trial with psilocybin or a trial with LSD or mescaline or whatever, or even DMT, purified DMT, which is included in ayahuasca. It's much more difficult than to start a trial with or a study with ayahuasca. So this is one of the reasons that we have our impact is connected a lot with this sacred brew. Also, there's one thing that we have to keep in mind in Brazil, research and this is that we have Ibogaine is not illegal in Brazil, United States and other countries of Europe, for instance. It is not authorized, formally authorized for medical usage. There's a gray area. Allows Ibogaine to be used in a legal frame for addiction. Studies about that, not in papers, but we have a game as well. Something else that hasn't been in Brazil, the psilocybin mushrooms, not forbidden. They are not illegal. They are psilocybin is illegal, but not the mushrooms. They it through the internet. Be a loophole that we use search in Brazil that happens. But we also have to acknowledge that also something that is peculiar to Brazil. We have a lot of research going on and that has been published in Brazil. We have to keep in mind that first, the studies on ayahuasca in Brazil, mainly in the 80s and the 90s, were studies from the humanities, basically anthropology, and have a long tradition from the University Federal of Bahia, the University of the Estado do Pará, University of Brasilia, that started with social sciences and anthropology to study ayahuasca. And then this opened to basic biomedical, so to speak, research, which has been led by the Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, which is a Brazilian state, the University of São Paulo, it's another Brazilian state, Federal University of São Paulo, the Federal University of Minas Gerais. So you can see that we have a constellation of universities that have been involved in ayahuasca research, and also a private institute for research, which is the Instituto D'Or de Pesquisa e Ensino. We are at Unicamp, where we have there is a tradition of also anthropological, but now we are also doing biomedical and what we tend to think as an interdisciplinary research. Obviously, we have a lot of universities that are not presented here, so I obviously such kind of list, we're going to miss some important universities, so I apologize for that. And also, but there is one point that we have to remind here that, and Camis is going to talk a little bit more about this, is that the research that is being done in Brazil is mostly done in the public universities in Brazil. They are publicly funded, and we are talking, most of this research is also publicly funded, or sometimes we have to find very creative ways to do research without much funding, which is obviously a problem in a low and in our case, in a middle income country, right? Also, we have new movements that are starting here as well. Like we have a startup called Sairama, which is the first Brazilian startup that is interested in funding ayahuasca and psychedelics, psilocybin and other psychedelics research in Brazil. And also an institute called Flourishes, which is currently mostly involved in education, but is also connected to some research. So we also have this more private model that is not major in Brazil, but it's also starting. And I mentioned that because we have to be aware that this may be related to some questions about intellectual property, indigenous peoples, and the legacy of these groups, and so forth and so on. Okay, so basically this is my first view that I would like to bring to you so you could understand this scenario, so we can open to further discussions with Bruno and Camis. But before that, I have to remind you again that we have a problem in Brazil that has to be solved, and the problem is this man, our Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, who has in the climate summit this week said a load of lies. He's not committed to saving and preserving the Amazon or Brazilian indigenous peoples. So we have to be aware of that as well. And this is also part of science, because also science has been heavily underfunded at the moment in Brazil as well. So thank you very much for your attention. If you want to get in touch with me, you can use this link, linklist.bio/Tófoli, T-O-F-O-L-I. And now let's move on now to Bruno's presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank Bia and Chakruna and everyone organizing this conference. It's great to be here with Tófoli, with Camis, and with everyone. I see in the chat a lot of people from Brazil, from different places, and from other places of Latin America. It's so important to have this kind of discussion here among us. And to notice how things are evolving in our region, which new issues are appearing for us to take care, to discuss. So thank you for the invitation. So I'll just present myself, and my talk will be focused on my field work that I did with clinics that use Iboga or Ibogaine, and also visiting ayahuasca, different ayahuasca rituals. I'm a psychologist. I've been working with harm reduction and drug use and etc. since 2004, and I also I've been working with ayahuasca and since 2009 to help homeless people And since 2010, I've been working with Ibogaine, helping the patients to get the most from this kind of treatment. I did my master degree in public health at the University of São Paulo, USP. I studied a group that used to use ayahuasca to recover homeless people. And now I'm about to finish my doctorate with Tófoli at Unicamp, where I'm studying Ibogaine patients. I'm doing a follow-up, 1 year follow-up, qualitative study, where I interviewed patients for 1 year to notice which were the effects, what they had that were important for their experience to try to overcome uh, drug dependence. Also, I did field work visiting many different clinics in Brazil. And so my will focus on trying to present this context, or this Brazilian context that, well, I think many people have heard about the ayahuasca use, but I think we have a specific situation here with a lot of unregulation, as Toffoli commented a little bit. And so this creates a scenario that brings us some positive situations and some negative also risks on this use. So I'd like to present this and try to show a little bit how this psychedelic renaissance, this moment that we are living and that we feel that we are part of it, how this new growing interest and investment on the psychedelics throughout the world are impacting the practices with ayahuasca, iboga, and other psychedelics in Brazil. So I will present data from my field work. I visited clinics in the state of São Paulo, and I've been visiting many different ayahuasca rituals. We have a boom, a huge proliferation of rituals from a wide variety of contexts and symbolic repertory. So I'll present a little bit of this. So first of all, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the place that we have in Brazil, and I guess that we have this in many low-income countries or emergent countries. The place that we have for the licit and illicit markets, because it's I think this is important because you see in this new revival of psychedelics, there's this idea of generating solid and up-to-date scientific evidence that will allow those substances to be regulated as novel and revolutionary medicines that will be approved by FDA or another national regulatory agencies. And this will work as a different, some kind of medicine pill. All this regulatory way makes a lot of sense, of course, but it's important to say that in Brazil, this licit aspect of the society, it's just, I guess, a part of our daily reality. We are a country that, since the 19th century, some laws exist only in the paper, not in reality. They have never been applied and will never be applied. There are so laws that are created for the English to see, as we say here, for the people in the rich countries to make them happy, as Tófoli was saying about Bolsonaro, that is we said that we protect the Amazon just for the English to see. That's how we say around here. And so this kind of context creates a whole part of our daily life as Brazilians that we have to relate to unregulated, illicit, or clandestine services or products. And of course, it's important to say that the president in power now, Bolsonaro, is also focused on trying to destroy these regulatory structures of the government to try to stop people from trying to control the deforestation. But this is happening not only in the environmental area, but also in the health area, in the education area. So we have a lot of unregulated parts of our society, and he wants to unregulate more. So also on our drug policy nowadays, we are closer to the Philippines or to Russia than to other progressive countries as Canada, Portugal, or Uruguay. We have a real violent and prohibitionist policy. We have we are leaders in police killing civilians, and usually black people from the peripheral regions of the city. So this specific way of creating the laws and organizing the society creates a specific situation for us in Brazil to deal with psychedelics and ritual plants, the plants that we use in ritual context. And this has some positive impact in the development of practices around here, but also brings some risks. There's a negative effect of this, of course. I'm not kind of defending to regulate everything, you know. But I'll just talk a little bit about this context of the ayahuasca use in Brazil. If in the 20th century, ayahuasca was mainly used by the three traditional ayahuasca religions, Santo Daime, Barquinha, União do Vegetal, and the indigenous groups. Nowadays we have like this huge expansion and diversification in the context of use. Many groups, they derived from those ayahuasca religions, or they were created, influenced by the indigenous groups, but many were kind of created in a very loose way, influenced by a proto-fascist ayahuasca leader that we had here, that he was called Gideon dos Lakota. He used to make like rituals to give a certification as a padrino and give people many liters of time. This helped to create a lot of rituals around the country and to popularize in a different way the use of ayahuasca in Brazil. Nowadays, I haven't seen yet a preacher, like an evangelical preacher, using ayahuasca in a evangelical cult, you know, like a Pentecostal cult. But except for that, I have seen everything. You know, I've seen like Buddhist, Hinduist, Christian, Taoist, Afro-Brazilian, Candomblé, Umbanda, Gypsy rituals, Jewish rituals, agnostic, atheist rituals, philosophical rituals to discuss philosophical issues under the influence of ayahuasca. And each of those kinds of ritual, many of them have different variations also. And also there's this popularization where you can, nowadays you can find like many different kinds of rituals in the poor regions of São Paulo, the peripheral regions that before ayahuasca was more like on the middle class, intellectual, liberal part of the society. Nowadays, we can see that like this use is spreading on the other parts, and that's very important. We are having really huge diversification of this use, as I said, in many different contexts, and also many of them are used ayahuasca using
Bruno, we can't hear you.
Agora, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. Well, so we have this huge variation with the use of the forest medicines. And it's important to say also that many of those different ayahuasca rituals, they are also, even if we have a kind of legal use of ayahuasca in Brazil, many of them are in a fringe of legality, because they don't follow a few basic rules that we have here, like not advertising or promising a cure. That are many places that are doing this. It's like it's part of Brazil, you know. People they kind of do like this, and so it with ayahuasca we have this kind of simple legal document that we have built in a very I can kind of say a very uh, smart way, a very good way to build it. But with the other substances, as Tófoli commented a little bit before, uh, we just have no regulation at all. It's just unregulated. That's the case of Ibogaine and psilocybe mushrooms. There's nothing in the Brazilian laws. The psilocybin, the substance inside the mushroom, is forbidden if extracted. But the mushrooms itself, they are not forbidden. That's good because they grow easily and by themselves in the fields throughout Brazil. Um, well, and that's good that those substances they escaped from prohibition here, because now we have like the creation of different also uses of those substances around here. Um, you can buy on the internet the mushrooms, but sadly we still don't have like the therapeutic use of this. It's like very shy. People don't really do it nowadays, but it's kind of something that can be done. I think in a safe way. It's important to do that, but it's possible to do it in Brazil. Um, and Ibogaine was almost unknown here in the country, almost until the end of, I guess, until 2010. Around this, there was like one or two people doing Ibogaine treatment here in the country. And it's interesting that we had like a study that was a very important study, a very good study with Ibogaine patients in Brazil, that was published through by PROAD Unifesp, university, Federal University in São Paulo, around 2013, 2014. And after that, and after the publicization of those results that showed very promising results, showing a good period of abstinence after Ibogaine, uh, very different from the other treatments that we have here. Um, and so after this study and the publication of this study, I have seen the creation of many different clinics and practices using Ibogaine. Sometimes Ibogaine in a more biomedical context, sometimes in a more ayahuasca context, used with singing. Sometimes a day before, people take cambo or ayahuasca to cleanse, and after that they take iboga or ibogaine. So ibogaine nowadays it's mixed with different contexts and with different practices. And there are many practices that are used in a very conservative, abstinence-oriented clinics that we have here. So we have like inpatient clinics using Ibogaine, some that offer like a 1-day Ibogaine treatment, some offer a 5-day Ibogaine treatment. There are people offering like home care services that treat with Ibogaine, so you can have the Ibogaine treatment in the comfort of your house. And also, I've seen some dangerous associations, like clinics offering involuntary treatment. That's something very common here in Brazil, and Ibogaine. What would turn up psychedelic treatment in a kind of torture sessions if the person doesn't really want to go for it, to participate in it. and I guess it would have very low outcomes. There are also as I said, clinics offering Ibogaine as another forest medicine, usually using cambo and ayahuasca before Ibogaine to cleanse the patient, and after that, periodic ayahuasca sessions to maintain the person, to keep him well. Also, I've seen clinics offering Ibogaine sessions to expand the conscience, or to help deal with corporative trainings in a very capitalistic way. So Ibogaine is, I guess, a new product in a very competitive market among different clinics. And also people are developing different ways of using it. So as you can see, there's already a wide variety of therapeutic use of psychedelics in the country, even now that we are still expecting legal changes to legally work with it. Also, in the last few years, with the great excitement and discussion about microdosing, all this discussion about microdosing LSD or psychedelic mushrooms, all these are having a lot of influence in the Brazilian context. So nowadays we can see people selling on the internet Ibogaine microdose, also capsules with grinded psilocides, the mushroom, or small portions of ayahuasca already into droppers, so you can take 1 or 2 drops. It's like a microdose of ayahuasca. This seems to be very attractive for those that are afraid or of having a psychedelic experience, or just for people that they don't want to face this experience since it's intense, it's hard. And this ayahuasca microdosing is making a lot of success during these pandemic times, when all those all the responsible groups, they are not organizing group rituals, and a lot of people want to take ayahuasca. A lot of people are not experienced to have ayahuasca by themselves in their houses. So we have this new way of using a traditional plant, plant that's used only in ritual around here. We have like in Santo Daime, people that use a little spoon, a colherzinha de daime, but that's different from the way that people are selling the microdose of ayahuasca nowadays. And it's also interesting that the iboga root in Gabon is also used in a very with small portions. It's different from microdose. It's something to make people feel better and to work more. It's different. So people are using those substances in developing new ways of using it. So I guess for me, all this unregulation creates all those possibilities. It's very interesting. We have a wide place. We know if we can use this paraphrase this idea of the psychedelics as a vast territory to be explored. I guess there's a vast territory to be explored outside the laboratory too, concerning psychedelics, not only studying them with everything controlled in the laboratory, but also to understand how those practices are developing, which sense they make for the patients and for the providers of those kinds of treatments. But also,
Bruno, you have 1 minute. Can you wrap up?
Okay, I will finish. Thank you. So this unregulation also creates more risk. About when we talk about Ibogaine, there are some serious risks as people that die during or after the use of Ibogaine. We have one case of a patient that died here in Brazil 5 years ago. We don't really know about what happened with him. So it would be important to explore more this case and other cases like this to find out more. Well, I think that's it. We have this wide country, this unexplored country of unregulated practices that are being developed, are being done. I guess we might find a Brazilian way of doing psychedelic treatments and not only trying to copy what people are doing in the USA and etc. And we have to understand what we are doing here in Brazil nowadays. I guess that's it. And thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Bruno, very much. Now, Camis, come forward.
Boa tarde, Brasil. Bom dia, Califórnia. Boa Serra, Katusha. Thank you, Bia, for inviting us. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us and learning more about psychedelic science in Brazil. Tófoli will be helping me with the PowerPoint slides, and I have a text I will be following. My name is Camis. I work with Bruno and Tófoli at ICARO, Unicamp, and I am also part of the Healing Encounters team at CNRS in France. So we can go to the first slide, please, Tófoli. And I will open here. Okay. I've done my undergrad, master's, and PhD at Federal University of São Carlos in the country São Paulo. And it was a quite important experience to me. It created a place I can call home to. It impacted my personal and my intellectual growth, my care for science and for the public and for Brazil and its people. It's important when we are talking about Brazilian science to know that most of our science, a bit more than 95% of it, following data from 2019, is made within the public universities, both state and federal universities. Unlike state universities in the US, here we have no tuition. So it's public and it's entirely free. Researchers are the teachers on those universities, but they are also students from undergrad to PhD level, and some are also contracted specialists. Tófoli, please go to the next slide. Okay, but only teachers and contracted specialists have the safeties of job security, even though and currently not even them are so safe. We are talking more about work benefits wise. Students are mostly reliant either on public scholarships from public research institutions such as Camis and CNPq, or on-site jobs, which is becoming more and more common as scholarships offers have been decreasing since 2015, a period when already not all grad students had scholarships. I started my PhD in 2015 and I got my scholarship only at the end of that same year. During most of the work party's years of government, the budget consistently increased. Alongside, there was also the growth in number of federal universities throughout the country. Federal universities also embraced affirmative actions, opening its doors to indigenous students, students from impoverished families, and African Brazilians. In the course of more than a decade, this impacted the production of knowledge in the country, as it now embraced a more diverse corpus of researchers. Public universities were previously more elitist before affirmative action, and also whiter. Later on, state universities also embraced affirmative action, and we could see those changes there too. But right before the coup d'etat that overthrew Dilma Rousseff's government, budget cuts started. And with Temer and Bolsonaro, the situation decreased. And as we had a greater number of universities now and a greater number of students, the budget cuts, they influenced way more. The infrastructure, the ability to make science within the universities. Please, Tófoli, the next slide. Because of that, scholarships were cut. Grad school became more difficult for those from poorer upbringings. Undergrad students who need food and housing support to maintain themselves at the universities became more vulnerable. Even teachers suffered. Many of them lost full salary retirement, for example. Bolsonaro and Temer governments are unfortunately popular for having this terrible impact over social security and retirement politics too. Some labs, libraries, infrastructure, everything started to fall in quality due to lack of funding, and the governments directly affected science and research in the country, creating reactionary monsters that put universities as communist spaces against family and religious values. Well, those kind of myths to create universities as these terrible spaces to justify the budget cuts, which is unjustifiable. I myself come from gender and sexuality field of studies, and I saw friends of mine, work colleagues, who had their works bullied online because they dealt with sexuality and queerness. And I saw also that happening to colleagues and friends who work on the field of drugs, especially from anti-prohibitionist perspective. Programs for African Brazilian studies and gender studies who were created to support teachers from high schools and elementary schools were also cut. The government's project is a project against science, against diversity, and as we are seeing through the COVID-19 pandemic, against life itself. One of the saddest episodes of recent Brazilian science history was the fire that destroyed Museu Nacional in 2018. Museu Nacional, from Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, was not only one of the most important Brazilian and Latin American museums, but also home of traditionally important departments of anthropology, archaeology, paleontology, and ethnobotany in the country and Latin America and the world. Another impact is on what we call fuga de cérebros, which means the movement of researchers graduated here in Brazil through public investment to other countries to look for jobs, to find research jobs and security. This not only means that we are losing our best intellectuals, our best researchers, but also money invested through years of education. Tófoli, please. Next slide. And even within this terrible scenario, this terrible project against public universities, against science, Brazilian psychedelic science flourishes. In a world where other psychedelic institutions are as big as Imperial College in the UK and Johns Hopkins in the United States, we are publishing a lot. As Tófoli was saying before, we have an impact, a global impact. And most of psychedelic science in Brazil, as most science in Brazil, is done within these public universities. And the results gathered are important and internationally relevant. And it's mostly because of ayahuasca and its specific regulation for research. We are able to do research, biomedical research with it, which is a legal gain from the team who worked on the building of the ladder that regulated the ritual use and the scientific approach to ayahuasca here in the country. Tófoli, please, the next one. But it's important to highlight that doing science without budget and without security, as life of grad students and teachers are becoming increasingly vulnerable and volatile. Public science at public universities, psychedelic science in Brazil flourishes as something like a guerrilla kind of science. I like the image on the left with the basketball players because I felt, oh, there my street is a bit loud. I'm so sorry for it. There is not much I can do. I'm really sorry. But this image has basketball players from the US and from El Salvador. And it makes me feel how I felt when I did part of my doctorate in the United States. And when friends of mine did the same in the United States or in Europe, we go to a different country, we enter those universities, and we see a whole bunch of great libraries and computers and everything for us to work on. And we see people who have a great education since elementary school. And I felt like those girls. And my friends felt like them too. A friend of mine in Netherlands said that the most terrible problem the laboratory in Netherlands was about a coffee flavor at the cafeteria. So things like that. And we are used to unite people, to unite projects, to work voluntarily, to write voluntarily, to make conferences with low budget or no budget at all, to be creative with the setting of our researchers, to be creative on how to access scientific papers, on how to access books. We have to be creative because we want to do science, and we are under a government that is against science itself. And that's happening to us. And it makes us psychedelic researchers also fighters for what is public. Not all of us, not all of the scientists in Brazil, but many of us. Because as me, who loves and respects deeply the university, the public university I came from, we all respect the places where we came from. We learned a lot. It was important, and we want more people to do science, to be at those universities. Please, the next one, Tófoli. And here I'm going to talk a bit about our national hero, Zé Gotinha, and or Joseph, little drop for the English speakers around there. It became a joke internationally because some of them are really ugly, and people from different countries said we are using a KKK mascot, but actually it's a drop. His head is a drop, and the ugliest ones are from people who are trying their best to make the costumes with different kinds of fabric, low budget knitting. We have this guerrilla for the public. We are at the periphery of capitalism. So the guerrilla for the public happens in different places, including at the Sistema Único de Saúde, SUS, as our universal health system that was created at the end of the military dictatorship and the beginning of the democratic government. And that was a great example worldwide for treating the HIV pandemic, and is the thing that is saving us, that is sustaining us during the terrible management of Bolsonaro, of the pandemic. And when we say that Zé Gotinha or Joseph Little Drop or Jack Little Drop, you may choose, as a national hero, is because he kind of is. It's a important figure for a vaccination campaign, for science, for public science, for public health, for people. It's quite important. And when we are talking about psychedelic science done within public universities, we are also talking about different ways of thinking, psychedelic therapeutical models. Within different events, conferences, psychedelic conferences, we always listen to that same question. Oh, but psychedelic therapeutics is so expensive. How are we going to do that? It's not going to be for everybody. But we have a public health system. Oh, I have 15 minutes. I have to to get quickly to the ends. And this is something quite important for psychedelic science in Brazil, to work for the public, to work for public science, to work for models within the public health system. This is something that makes us awesome. We are quite awesome. And even though we are doing much, hopefully our fight leads us to government, to a state that respects the public and everything. And Tófoli, please, the last slide to finish. And here we have some civilian groups for psychedelics, for drugs, for science, who are quite important for us, who are creating amazing things. I myself am part of Associação Psicodélica do Brasil, Psychedelic Brazilian Association. I've been to conferences from Abrange. I'm from NAPE too, And these groups, they connect scientists and researchers who want to do more and who want to do more within the respect for the public, for science, for creativity, for everything. So I don't have much time. I'm over my time, but thank you for listening, and that's it. And let's fight for public science, public health, and everything public. Thanks.
Camis, we have a lot of questions here. We have until 4:10 for questions and answers. I'm not being able to put all of us in the same screen. I don't know why. I cannot finish the presentation, so you probably saw that my screen was on all the time. I'll try to, let's see if I can. Oh, okay, that's it. So sorry about the black screen. It's just because I cannot close it. But anyway, here we are, and I'm gonna ask some questions. I have some specific questions to Bruno. So Bruno, I'll ask the questions and see if you can manage to get them together in a single answer, okay? So Gisele asked about, I don't know if you can understand exactly what she meant, but she said that if you could speak further about the clinics in Brazil and clarify the comments that sometimes Ibogaine is given to patients despite their desire to ingest it. How does it happen? And also, Natalia asked if you could talk a little bit more about the professional relationship. So it goes, these two questions are related. That's why I'm asking together. If you can talk a little bit more about the professional patient relationship, and that happens in Brazil, and because sometimes there is what she names as quackery, and when people start selling cures, quote unquote cures. So I wonder if you could give us an answer about
it. Thank you, Tófoli and Natalia and Gisele for the questions. Well, first of all, Gisele, I've been in my doctorate research. I've visited many clinics. I visited 4 clinics, and I talked with providers from other different clinics, and I talked with the guy from this clinic that offers Ibogaine treatment and also involuntary treatment. I haven't been there. I don't know if they force people to take Ibogaine. It seems just dangerous to me. I can't affirm that they are forcing people to take Ibogaine, but I hope not. But that, I guess that's one of the risks that we have in Brazil, since we have this unregulated part, but not only about the psychedelics, but also all these treatment services that we have in Brazil. There's a lot of therapeutic communities that they have almost no regulation, no fiscalization, so people can, maybe, I guess they are doing this, and that's dangerous. That would be like a torture, to give someone a psychedelic that he really doesn't want in a place that he really doesn't want to be. That would be very violent, and I guess not efficient as a treatment. And Natalia, well, I don't know about the professional therapeutic use of psychedelics. Well, I guess in Brazil we have those gray areas that we have for many things, and we have this also around psychedelics. So, as a psychologist, I can't prescribe a psychedelic. I can't prescribe psilocybin, ayahuasca, or ibogaine, or MDMA, or anything like this. But I can be with a patient that had a substance, like in the same way that I can like a therapeutic companion. I don't really know how to translate this modality of therapeutic work. When you do something with your patient, the therapeutic relationship won't be about just talking about something, but being and doing something with him. I guess it's possible to be with a patient that had a substance, but you can't prescribe or dose a substance. That would be illegal. In the case of Ibogaine, I work with a doctor that works legally with Ibogaine. He can import it as a medicine from another country, import it in a safe way. It's like a legal way. And I do only the preparation, the post-treatment, like the therapy. I do psychotherapy sessions focused on the patient, his issues, and how to get better using the Ibogaine effect, what to expect from Ibogaine. And well, I guess we can also integrate as part of psychotherapy the use of ayahuasca, but not like wouldn't be legal to use it. You give it, like you prescribe and you give it to your patient. It's not in Brazil you can use like as a religious use, but your patient may go to a ritual and you can follow his process and help him with this process. I don't know if that's exactly what you meant when you asked, but well, I guess that's it. There's another, just another question, Tófoli.
Bruno, there's one thing. There's one thing about those who are quackers who are trying to sell cures.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. Well, we can't promise anything for the patient. That would be really illegal. In the same, well, I guess someone can do the same thing that people do with alternative therapies, to promise something or to say that we'll do some kind of thing, but we don't have those kind of data. We still don't know what it will do, but I guess we can help the patient to do it in a safe way and in a way that he will get the most from his experience. I guess that's possible to do it and not promise anything and sell any kind of cure, but just help the patient to in his movement towards his cure, towards overcoming some kind of issue. And just there's another question from Fidel.
Bruno, can you just have just a second so we can move on and circulate the word? Then
yeah, it's quickly because I've just answered to him that
okay,
it's not endogenous from Ibogaine. The Ibogaine is not endogenous in Brazil.
Yeah, let's say the question. It's the person's curious about the idea when or how Ibogaine migrated from Africa to Brazil, but it's only Ibogaine. There's no plantation of Ibogaine and no religious use of Iboga in Brazil. Fidel. Fidel also, I'm sorry, it seems that Camis is offline. I can't get in touch with him through WhatsApp, so let's see if he gets back again. Fidel also asked about the status of surviving African traditions of healing spirituality in Brazil. So perhaps I'll answer a little bit about this, but I think it's interesting. Oh, Camis is back again. Great. Did you listen to the question, Camis? Because this is interesting. So I'll read it again. Fidel asked, what is the status of surviving African traditions of healing spirituality and focused on psychedelic, plant-based, or generally in the cultural and practical mix in Brazil? So is there any survival tradition, African tradition of healing in Brazil? And the plain question is yes, a lot. even in as in African Brazilian religions, which are similar to what there is in Cuba, the Santeria in Cuba. There are similar, actually more than one syncretic religions in Brazil, and they have a lot of influence in healing in general, and also it has they have an influence even in the evangelical churches in Brazil. The evangelical churches tend not to admit that, but that also happens, which is similar to the evangelical traditions that migrated from the new Pentecostal traditions that migrated from the United States to Brazil. They started in African American communities in the States. So there is an influence of that. And specifically in if you want to talk about Santo Daime, one of you guys.
So I'll let some time for Camis to comment, but I'll comment about the Ibogaine, the Iboga, the Guichi tradition. It's interesting that here in Brazil we have a very strong African heritage, Afro-American rituals all around the country, and although this symbolism, although many daily rituals from people in their houses are connected with some Afro-American traditions, Afro-Brazilian traditions, but I think that we didn't have many slavers coming from Gabon or from that region, specific region, and we don't have like this kind of influence. So the Guichi ritual is very different from what we have here concerning the Candomblé and Umbanda and all those African influences.
Okay, Camis, what about answering Emilia Sanabria's question? She said, thanks for this wonderful panel. And she asked, what is the key for bridging the gap? And thank you, Emilia. What is the key for bridging the gap in psychedelic research in the global north and the global south? What do institutions in the global north need to learn?
I believe the most important thing is to learn different ways of making science, different ways of creating, and different paths, and listening. Because I myself had trouble with it. My colleagues and friends who went study in European or institutions from the United States has this same problem of talking, of conversation. So we are asked to be equal to Europeans and to Americans, and we are not. We are culturally different. We have different upbringings. We have gap of English speaking. I speak English quite well, but even though it's hard. So when receiving students, researchers, I think European and American institutions should listen more, should be really open to the global south. Is not just having vacancies at the universities for us, but changing a bit, being really willing to receive us. And this happens, and when we are talking about psychedelic science, we are talking to also about referencing our works, sometimes important pivotal pioneer work done by Brazilian researchers aren't referenced. Sometimes we cannot publish on important magazines, foreign magazines, because the barriers are different for us. yesterday I was talking to Bruno and Tófoli, and as Brazilians, we have to be twice, 3 times, 4 times more competent than people in Europe, than people in the United States. And it's hard because, as I was presenting here, we have we have this science making of guerrilla. A great thing that happened to me when I was at the US is that I had a Cuban friend, and we used to study together, and we were like, oh my God, look at this library, oh my, look at this, look at, and we were like, and we had an American friend who was like, it's life, it's normal. And we were like, dude, this isn't like, you know, things are hugely different. We, and doing the bridging must regard this and not ask us to be the same as Europeans and Americans, because we are not. And to put value at our creativity, which is awesome and huge, as we are able to create Joe little droplets. Zagotinha, vai!
I have to advert everyone that the session closes automatically at 4:10, so we have to be aware that it shuttles down. It shuts down at this moment when it gets to 4:10. So it's not me doing that. I just want to answer a little bit of this question. Is that we have to be aware. The North has to be aware that there is novel idea. There are novel ideas that are created and being developed everywhere, and that includes the South. So this also regards even internal differences that we have in countries. When I used to live in what is called an underdeveloped region of Brazil, northeastern Brazil, I couldn't come to my fellow my colleagues from São Paulo, which is supposedly developed, but at least financially developed part of Brazil, and bring ideas from this underdeveloped part, because they would immediately think this as not what they could contribute with new ideas. So this happens everywhere. It's not only the global South and global North, but I think it's important that creativity and novel ideas and ways of dealing with creating resilience, and we are experts in resilience in the South, can happen anywhere. So I think that's an important point. I don't know if Bruno wants to add something. Okay. So there is, I'm gonna ask all of us this question from Gabriela Weidman. Do you have any expectations for the future of psychedelic research in Brazil? She's a graduate student in psychology, and she wants to work with psychedelic research. So what will happen in the future? We have one challenge specifically when we're talking about the therapeutic use, which is the barrier of the model of the randomized controlled trial, the placebo-controlled randomized controlled trial, because we cannot really have true placebos with psychedelics. And the whole system of developing a new drug is based on placebos. And that we just have to see the coronavirus and the vaccines. So it always based on that. And because of this model and the regulatory agencies are based on this model, if we don't have creative ways of surpassing this barrier, we're going to have problems in the application. And if you ask me if we're going to find these new ways, I think yes, we are going to do that. But that will demand us creativity and new ideas and efforts. And probably that's the same thing that we have studies with psychedelics. We have to be more perfect, if you can say like that, than regular studies with antidepressants, for instance, right? And I think this is one point. But I think that the study of psychedelics in consciousness and trying to understand the mind, as we have already a couple of studies on this regard, I think this is going to move on. This is not going to be stopped. And I think that eventually we're going to have therapeutic applications. But I'm not as optimistic as I used to be. I think we have to be aware that the system organizes itself to maintain its stability. And psychedelics are more or less against this type of instability. The other possibility is if psychedelics are included in the system, and this is also kind of happening. So it's well, let's see what happens. I think I think that sooner or later we're going to have psychedelics as therapeutics. Anyone wants to say something about this? Yep. Okay. Camis, I'm going to ask. I said about Tropicalia, but I want to listen to your opinion about that. Okay. So Iago asked, coming back to Tropicalia and tropicalism, in your opinion, art and psychedelia, are art and psychedelia tools that are important tools for the resistance and the fight against the alt-right and right extremists? So is art a way of resistance? Is psychedelia a way of resistance to the right extremists?
Yes, of course, especially because conservatives and white supremacists, they don't like art. And so we continue doing art, and it's a way of creating, it's a way of bridging, it's a way of doing things, it's a way of thinking better futures, it's a way of knowing ourselves better, it's a way of doing our science too. And I think it's awesome to also crack on some conservative psychedelic ideas that, for example, the 70s was something too hippish, and now the psychedelic renaissance is not hippish at all. We are doing this serious stuff, and it's me like going towards this Silicon Valley model of thinking and creating psychedelic science and high stakes use of psychedelics. And well, why? We can be creative. We can be hippish. We can be countercultural in different ways. So I think art is perfect for us to cut conservative views and the fear of being hippish.
Okay, so and Paula asked about what do we think about legalizing all forms of use of psychedelics, not only for religious or therapeutic purposes.
I'm all on to it. Like, legalize it now, especially, yeah, it's a way of going against this conservative way of there is just one way to use psychedelics, just one way to do therapeutical use of psychedelics. And if we continue on this path, it's not only going to struggle science the way we do at ICARO, but also the religious uses of ayahuasca and other psychedelics, recreational uses. So yeah, legalize everything. For me, it's that. I don't know about Bruno and Luís. Like, yes.
Well,
to say something before the room shuts down. Well, it's important, of course, we should legalize all forms, but we have to think on how to do it. It would be very important to how to inform people about psychedelics, how to prepare themselves so they don't need to depend on practitioners. They can use practitioners, have someone to help if they want, but they can have their own experience also. Thanks.
That's it. Thank you all for your attention. Let's see all the wonderful panels and presentations in the conference. And have a nice time. Take care. Use masks. Vaccinate. Be smart. And don't mix your drugs. And fora Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro out. That's it, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.